So Joshua is about to take the people into the Holy Land. And he asks them to choose who they're going to serve. Well, who do you think they've been serving for the last 40 years? This is not the group that came out of Egypt. They're dead. Every single person who used to live in Egypt, except Joshua and Caleb, are dead. These people have been encamped in the wilderness for 40 years, and every time they camp, the tabernacle is right in the middle of their tents. And they surround the tabernacle with their tents. And Joshua has the temerity to say, now choose. And I think the essence of that is that no matter how long we have been serving, it's always time to choose. And the people say this. They say, the next verse says, the people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. We too will serve the Lord because He is our God. And they did too, occasionally. And that's, in a nutshell, is the story of the Old Testament. The occasionally. Sometimes they served God, and sometimes not so much, kind of like you and me. And God always loved them while they were serving and while they were not. And so, years ago, when I used to stay up all night and watch TV, I don't do that anymore. It's so good to have the Late Show on demand. If I feel like watching it, I can actually watch it at a decent time. But years ago, I used to stay up late and watch Johnny Carson. And Bob Dylan was on. And as you might remember, whenever there was a musical act, it was going to be last. But I really liked Bob Dylan, and so I fought. I'm laying in bed watching Johnny Carson. Peggy and I used to do that, and I fought going to sleep, and stayed up, and Dylan starts to sing, and on the next slide are the lyrics that he sang, and it's. You might be an ambassador to England or France. You might like to gamble. You might like to dance. You might be the heavyweight champion of the world. You might be a socialite with a long string of pearls, but you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed, you're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil, or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. And by the way, behind him is a band that has a group of African-American women who are singing, serve somebody! And I was going, wow, this is so cool. I said, Bob Dylan is singing Christian music? For one album. One album, he did. Slow Train Coming, if you want to Google the album. You're going to have to serve somebody. We are hardwired to serve something in our lives. Until I was married, I served having fun. Having fun was all I did. You can tell that by my grades in school. I was one of those kids that the teacher always wrote on his card, does not work up to his potential. And I wondered how she knew that since she'd never seen it. I still don't get that. But evidently they realized that this kid is smarter than what he's producing. But when my father finally decided that he'd have enough of D's, and I was in college by that time, and he says, I'm not paying for another semester, I joined the Navy. Because I'm not going to serve you. And so served 4 years in the Navy, and while I was in the Navy, I got married, and then came out of the Navy, and I got a job, and I realized that this job working on an assembly line sucks. And so I said, I better go to school. And so I served, going to school, and working and taking care of my family. And then at about age 25, I made another decision. So next slide, let's review a little bit because many of you were not here last week, and hardly anybody comes every week except Barry and Diana. Bless your hearts, you know, right there. I know that you're in another state if you're or real sick if you're not here on Sunday morning. But an addiction is anything that we think that we must have to be okay. You just have to have that. And looking good and being right are primary addictions. We'll do anything to keep that posture of looking good and being, I'm right, you're not, and that's the way it is. I do that, you do that, especially in a political year, we're all doing that. And each of those primary addictions has thousands of possible sub-addictions, and all of yours will be different than mine. We'll have different combinations of things that we're addicted to. And for Peggy, for instance, it's caffeine. She's got to have caffeine. She will, I can drink decaffeinated coffee. Doesn't bother me at all. Caffeine doesn't keep me awake at night, and it doesn't wake me up in the morning. I love the taste of coffee, but if it's decaffeinated, that's fine. Her addictions are different than my addictions. But they all revolve around somehow looking good and being right. And most of our addictions can be harmful in some way. Some are harmful in every way. But most of them, even the lightweight ones, the ones that we think we're in control of, that's a myth, by the way, are potentially harmful when they get out of control. They usually are, because they take up time, they take up money, they may take up our health. So addiction to God, and that's the premise of this entire, what will be 13 weeks when I finally get done. It'll be Advent. We'll take a break when Teen Challenge comes in October and let him preach. But we'll go from now till Advent with this. And my premise is that being addicted to God is the only thing that's not only harmless but actually helpful. And I believe that I need God. It's something that addiction is anything we think we must have to be okay, and I think that I must have God to be okay. Other people, not so much. That's not one of their addictions. But I've chosen that one. And so next slide, step 1 and 2 that we dealt with last week and the week before. We first of all admitted that we were powerless over our addictions and that our lives had become unmanageable. If this is not true for you, then the whole rest of the series will be interesting, but you won't do anything with it. And then we came to believe that a power that is greater than ourselves would restore us to sanity. Now, if you think you're already sane, well, then, you know, we don't need a power greater than myself. I can be my own power. I can do it. I can manage. I am the, what was it, the something of my fate, the captain of my soul. Remember that poem? Well, we got a lot of people, you know, out there saying, you know, just do this, take charge of your life. Now, the things that we must come to believe are that, first of all, God exists and rewards seekers. That's called in the Methodist Church prevenient grace. That's a unique term to Methodism. Then, secondly, that Jesus is alive and saves me. That's justifying grace. That's pretty much an all-church thought. And then finally, that God keeps changing my life for the better, which is sanctifying grace. Which also is not totally a Methodist thought, but the Methodists were the first group to really begin to make that public and to make that a vital piece of our theological and spiritual puzzle. Those are the three things. That, first of all, God is out looking for you when you're not looking for God. And that the death of Jesus on the cross and his resurrection brings you into salvation. Brings you to heaven, brings heaven to you. And the heaven to you is the sanctifying grace that we need to believe in. In other words, God loves me. Now that is so simple. Jesus loves me. This I know. It's the simplest of truth and the hardest to believe. It's the hardest for us to believe. Because if there's a God who runs things, and this God is just crazy about you, why would you not want to hang out with him? And yet it's so difficult for us, and we're so easily distracted. You know, there was one of those movies that has a combination of real human beings and cartoons, and it was they're trying to defeat an evil being, which was a cartoon, and one of these kids had a sidekick. I forget what he was, some kind of wild animal, fox or skunk or anyway. This wild thing, when he was right on, was pretty much undefeatable. And so, and he was on the kid's side. But every time he saw a squirrel, he'd be off chasing the squirrel. And that is such a metaphor for you and I, isn't it? I mean, we're just so easily distracted from our mission, which is to make disciples, to become disciples, who make disciples and change the world. So step 3, which is what we want to deal with today. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Now, Bill W. took a lot of heat from the church about the "as we understood Him" part. Because Bill came from a Christian background, And they said, well, why don't you just put Jesus in there? Turn our lives over to the care of Jesus. And he said, well, that would take everybody who really doesn't believe in Jesus and eliminate them from AA meetings. But as the prayer this morning pointed out, every name falls short of your goodness and greatness. You are the eternal mystery. If I took each one of you separately and asked you, what do you think about God? And we talked for 10, 15, 20 minutes. We would come up with as many definitions of who God is as there are people in this room. There would be commonalities, because we're all Methodists, and we all sit and listen to the same guy on Sunday morning, but there would be differences, because of our lives are all different. And we've all experienced God differently. We have different parents who thought different things about God. It's got to be God as you understand Him. It can't be any other kind of God. Whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or whatever you are, it's God as you understand. That's the only God you can give yourself to. But the important part is we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over. Ah! Now, in theory, that's a great theory. Yeah. Oh, I give myself to you, God. Good. In practice, not so much. Squirrel! I'm going to give my life to you until it becomes inconvenient. Until you do something that ticks me off. Until there's an inconvenient truth. And so, that decision, like the decision for the Israelites, needed to be a fresh decision. We're going into the Holy Land. I have to make sure everybody's on the same page. Are we following God or not? And at the time, it seemed like they certainly were. I mean, they took the Holy Land by storm. With God's help, of course. I've mentioned this a dozen times at least. The great Saint Meister Eckhart, 1,700 years ago. We must be born again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. I heard somebody in one of the videos that Peggy finds for me. She's just so good at finding these videos. And you gotta watch this. I got time to watch that. And thankfully, it's not a TV program that it's a video that she can turn off and turn back on later. And so this lady was talking about her conversion experience, and she says, a conversion is an awakening when you grasp your need for God's grace so profoundly that it separates your life into a before and an after. It doesn't have to be emotional, but it brings clarity to spiritual truth. The light, all those cartoons where the light bulb would go on, it's that kind of thing. And I've had hundreds of these throughout my career. hundreds of them. Usually small ones. I usually don't remember how my life changed because it changed such a tiny bit. I've had two that I could tell you about in great length, and I won't, that were memorable to the point where I could tell you about them at great length, and I won't. One at about 25 and another about 50. And my life was significantly different after that experience. Some people have never had a great experience like that. But the hundreds and hundreds of little experiences that we have are available to us. And for instance, you have the chance to have one this morning. Or this can just be a good sermon and you can be interested. A conversion is an awakening where you grasp your need for God's grace so profoundly that it separates your life into a before and an after. And as the Roman Catholic nun Ilia Delio says, what we love is what we become. When we choose God, we become more like God. When we choose money, we become more like money. When we choose any of our addictions, we become more like that addiction. Isaiah put it this way: all of you who are thirsty, come to the water. Whoever has no money, come, buy food and eat. Without money, and at no cost, buy wine and milk. Why do you spend money for what isn't food, and your earnings for what doesn't satisfy? Listen carefully to me. Eat what is good. Enjoy the richest of feasts. Listen and come to me. Listen and you will live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you. The problem with all of our other addictions, and that they're not usually bad things. They're not. I mean, we're all addicted to air, food, water, sleep, certain room temperature. You know, those are not bad things. Those are necessary things. The problem is Peggy and I are addicted to different room temperatures. Oh. The problem with all of the other things that the Old Testament calls idols, the New Testament calls them sins, is that they're not permanent. They're temporary. To use them is one thing, to be addicted to them is another. And that's really difficult, and it's up to each person to decide what my use of this thing is. God is permanent. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is a thing to which, when we decide to serve, our lives change. So wonderful yesterday to be able to preach Bob Roach's funeral. Wonderful for me, tough on the family. But I had a whole, like 120 people in this room, most of whom had never heard me preach before, could have said anything. And I knew that. I took a look around at the visitation, and I said, I don't know any of these people. I can just take an old sermon and put it on. And then I started thinking about Bob, started thinking about his life. And God said, why don't you preach this? Okay. And Bob had a lot of things that he enjoyed doing. But his love was for God, and it changed him in such a way that he became more interested in other people than he was in himself. I visited him on Labor Day because I knew that he was close. And so I went out to Three Rivers on Labor Day. I had anything else to do on Labor Day. And visited with Bob. And the first thing he said when he saw me, and he's laying there in that bed, I mean, he's so skinny, you practically put your hand around his waist. And just, you know, about to die any hour. First thing out of his mouth is, Pastor, how are you? I'm not dying. I'm fine. You know, it wasn't, never, in fact, never did I ever visit with Bob that he complained about his symptoms. Boy, I would. You'd hear from me. Said, how are you? Why, I have ache here, pain there. Nurse won't bring me more medication. Food's not good. Just ask my wife. It's God that provides when we choose God. See, God has already chosen you. That's a done deal. That was a done deal the moment you were born. In fact, the Bible says when I was still in my mother's womb, you chose me. God has already chosen. You did not call me, I called you, said Jesus. And so now you get to reciprocate. You get to choose. Choose this day whom you will serve. All the gods of your fathers, your forefathers, or the Lord? And Israel responded, far be it from us. We will serve God. So before we get to the next slide, I'd like us to sing an old hymn of the church. And it was the hymn that Billy Graham always used before an altar call, 357, just as I am, without one plea. And the reason that Dr. Graham used this is because it basically talks about why we choose God. And it talks about putting aside the reasons that we sometimes give for not choosing God, which are basically two. Basically, there's two. The first one is the Pharisees' reason. I don't need God. I already got God. God me or fine. The second one is the sinner's reason. I'm not good enough for God. Both of those are lies, and they work differently, but they work for Satan's purpose the same. In the same, the end result is you get to choose your addictions, because you know you can handle those, right? Except that mostly they handle us. So stand with me and sing number 357. This is I Am Without One. We will sing all verses, and then we're going to pray a prayer that was written by Alcoholics Anonymous called the Third Step Prayer. Standing, and we'll look at the next slide and pray this prayer together. We'll change a couple of words to update it, but basically this is the one that's been prayed by Alcoholics Anonymous for almost 100 years now. Pray with me. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may be a witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. Amen. You may be seated. Time for us to pray, and this is a special day. It is the 15th anniversary of 9/11. The day